Hey YouTube, thanks for joining me back with another video on the Myers-briggs personality assessments, how it works, the little intricate parts of it, so we can actually begin to determine what our personality types are and at least get a little bit closer to understanding the people around us and how we may be able to interact with them. Today's video is going to be on introversion and extroversion. Completely different than social introversion and extroversion. We will get into those little details. But before we start, a quick little summary of what it is. In its most simplest version, Myers-briggs introversion and extroversion is an understanding of where we pull stimuli from. When we are processing information, when we are making decisions, are we pulling that stimuli from within ourselves or from our external environment? What fuels that? If we can begin to understand that, then we can really, truly understand what Myers-briggs introversion and extroversion are. Now, if you fully have a grasp on it, if you feel confident now, you have my permission, go ahead and leave this video. But if not, if you would like to stick around, we're going to go ahead and get into the nitty-gritty details. Before we start, though, as a reminder, my name is Gary Wade. I am an author. That is my day job. That is my work by trade. I have worked in the Marine Corps and law enforcement as a high school teacher, but currently I'm working on my debut novel, The Seeing. You can see the details about that on my website, GaryWadeBooks.com. You can also find me on Twitter, where I have a little bit of current events commentary, some poetry, some little side projects that I'm working on. So please follow me there. Follow me on all those different platforms. And if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. It definitely helps the algorithm. So stick around. We're going to go ahead and get into Myers-briggs introversion and extroversion. As stated in my intro, Myers-briggs introversion and extroversion is entirely different from social introversion and extroversion, right? The easiest way we normally conceptualize social introversion and extroversion at a really basic, dumbed-down level is, hey, if I'm socially extroverted, I enjoy talking with people. If I'm socially introverted, I don't necessarily enjoy talking with people, right? And the way I describe this to people is a social battery. If you have a social battery, does it get recharged when you're around people, or does it get recharged when you're by yourself, right? That's a good way to understand how we fit socially into different circles. And that is important, but that's not what Myers-briggs is about. The Myers-briggs introversion and extroversion looks more at stimuli, kind of like what I said before. So how does this look, right? I like to picture a beacon out in the middle of the ocean, right? Imagine dark ocean, just little flashing lights, right? Pretty easy to visualize this light tower of sorts pushing light out into the darkness. That's how I always conceptualize Myers-briggs introverts, okay? I have it here on my handy-dandy whiteboard here. You can see my introverts are pushing stuff out. Why? Because the origin of the information is coming from inside you, okay? Now, that's pretty important when you're looking at either thinking, which is going to be more logic-based, feeling, which is going to be more emotion-based, right? Sensing, which is going to be tangible, physical stuff, or intuitiveness, which is going to be more patterns and metaphysical stuff, right? All of these different traits are going to be keyed up. If they're introverted, they're going to come from somewhere inside of you, as opposed to being an extrovert, okay? That's going to be siphoning, okay? If the introvert is like a beacon in the middle of the ocean, a lighthouse, so to speak, an extrovert is almost going to be like a camera with the lens completely open, where it's absorbing every bit of light molecule, right? If anybody who's ever worked with a camera before understands bulb mode, you can click it on bulb mode and it is taking in every single light photon that it can find and trying to form a picture of it. It's really good for long exposure photographs. Some pretty cool stuff you can find on long exposure photographs online. And that's kind of what an extrovert does. Hey, this receptor is open constantly, so we're just trying to suck in every bit of information possible so we can go ahead and find it, okay? Now, how these interact with the different traits and where they pop up in your system, they're all going to look entirely different. Okay, we are going to get into each one of these traits. We're going to make a video in the future on every single personality type and how each one of those traits interacts with one another, and that's going to change if you're introverted or extroverted. But one key thing to understand between this extroversion and this introversion is because it does not key into social practices, because it's not social introversion and extroversion, Just because you may have an extroverted personality with Myers-Briggs does not mean you're going to be the loud person. Does not mean you're going to be the golden retriever person who is constantly wanting to talk with everybody. Okay, this is where a lot of people get it wrong. They say, hey, I am an ENFP. I feel like I probably should be bouncy and bubbly and want to go be this super extroverted person because I start with an E, but I find myself not doing that. And that's perfectly fine. When you begin to understand that this extroversion just means you're probably going to get a little bit of that good idea fairy a little bit more when you're getting some type of external stimuli. Okay. Now, in my experience, for my extroverts, that stimuli could be from social interaction. It also could be from music. It could be from movies. It could be from books. These are all stimuli. It's mental stimuli, not necessarily physical stimuli. And that's going to be a little bit of a niche difference between your N's and your S's, right? Your intuitors and your sensors, which we'll cover that in another video. But for now, as long as we can really understand that, hey, just because you're an extrovert does not mean you're going to be socially extroverted all the time. It's where you're pulling that information from. Same goes for an introvert. I've known many introverts who are super talkative. And right, sometimes we have some consistency. Sometimes we have an INTP who, or an INFP who really doesn't like to talk with people. They're just stuck inside their head all the time. And right, there is sometimes these consistencies here. But also, I've known quite a bit of introverts, people who lead with an introverted trait, who talk a lot, especially when you find that little niche that they are super passionate about and they feel confident in, and they're going to talk your ear off almost too much. Okay, so this is all really important to understand. Another interesting part about introverting and extroverting, though, is how they loop. What I mean by looping is when you look at each personality type, each of those is going to be broken down into their 1, 2, 3, and 4 spots. I slightly covered that in my very first video. If you need a reference to that, please click it up. It's video number 1, why MBTI. Okay, but if you remember that pattern, the 1 and the 2 spot are going to be opposite. If your first spot is going to be extroverted, then your second spot is going to be introverted. If your second spot is introverted, then your third spot is going to be extroverted. And that's really important because what we find by and large, right, and there's always little deviations, but by and large, when you're looking at a person's personality, if they are leading with some type of judging trait, right, if they have that bias for action, they're really trying to click off answers with the bare minimum amount of information, that process is either going to be introverted and extroverted, and whatever is augmenting that, whatever processing function, sensing or intuitiveness that's augmenting that is going to be the exact opposite, which is a funny little phenomenon within there. So if, for instance, I am really leading with my introverted feeling, and let's say I'm a judger and I'm really leading with my introverted feeling, which is going to be very morality based. I'm going to be really set up with my emotional state, my morals, my judgments on these moral decisions. I'm leading with that, with this bias for action. And then my parent trait, that second trait, the one that's really augmenting it, that's helping me process, because we follow the OODA loop. We have to decide and orient, or we have to observe and orient before we can make a decision. Okay, so whatever is augmenting that is going to be extroverted, whether that is sensing or intuiting. Okay, so we have someone who may be very leading with a real high priority on morals, on internal morals, but they're going to be keying everything off of what's happening externally. If that's sensing, then they're going to be looking at the tangible environment, the physical environment around them, and they're going to be pinging off all these little cues and seeing how they specifically fit in there within that moral framework and seeing what the most moral approach is. But if you have maybe an extroverted intuitor, okay, that's going to be that more metaphysical. Either way, though, they're siphoning all this information in from around them and knowing exactly where they fit into that moral framework and where the route to go forward is. And because they're leading with that high priority on a moral framework, they're going to be that beacon out in the middle of the ocean. They're going to be that lighthouse. And you're going to see people, especially these people who maybe are introverted feelers or introverted thinkers, because they're leading with that judgment, with that judging trait. It's very, very much has a bias for action. You're going to see these people just absolutely making waves everywhere they go. They're not going to be quiet about it. They're going to be very decisive. They're going to be outspoken about their stuff because they know, whether it's logic or morals, they know exactly where they fit in. They have went ahead and brought in all this external stimuli, and they're going to move forward with confidence, knowing that, hey, I know what is right here. And sometimes that can be a little off-putting to some people, but you have to understand, that's why Myers-briggs is so great. You have to understand that, hey, maybe they're not trying to be rude. Maybe they're not trying to be crass. Maybe they're not trying to discount your opinions. They just understand, because they've prioritized this thought process. They understand, hey, this is the best for this sequence. Maybe it is the best for the sequence because it's where I fit into, or maybe we're operating as a team, so I'm seeing that team as one unit of the self. But either way, they have put a priority into this thought process, and they've already crunched all the variables, and they know either morally or logically, whichever one it is, that this is the right path to move in. And, if you have somebody who maybe is an extroverted feeler, they might lead or augment with extroverted feeling. They can be a little bit more touchy. They can have these little covert contracts, and that might be a little off-putting to them because, oh, you're not validating my opinion. Well, no, it's not that they're purposefully not validating it. It's that they know exactly where they sit on it, and they haven't placed a priority on stuff external to them in that sense, right? Yes, they're intaking all that information, but when it comes to the deciding and the acting portion of the OODA loop process, they're structuring everything from an internal mechanism, whether that be morality or logic. The same is also true when you are looking at leading with these extroverted traits. Okay, if you have a judger, once again, your judgers, your people who are leading with thinking or feeling, they're really going to make those waves. Why? Because they have that bias for action. You can't necessarily fault them for it. That's just their natural proclivity toward action. Okay, but if you have someone who's really leading with this extroverted judging trait, whether that is thinking or feeling, okay, they may really lean on these external forces, right? How does extroverted thinking look? We're going to have a whole video on this, but in summary, right, extroverted thinking is going to look at, it's going to take an ethos approach, really, where introverted thinking takes a logos approach, extroverted thinking takes an ethos approach, an appeal through authority, right? They're going to be like a living, walking encyclopedia or dictionary. They're going to know the rules. They're going to have an intense understanding of those rules, and it's going to be really hard to debate them, especially on anything outside of those rules. It's going to be black and white. Okay, now they're going to be augmenting with something that is introverted, because once again we have a loop. That's what this loop means right here, right? If you're leading with introversion, you're going to be augmenting with extroversion, and vice versa. If you're leading with extroversion, you're going to be augmenting with introversion. So if you are a judger who is leading with an extroverted thinking trait, then whatever you're going to be augmenting with has to be introversion. Okay, which absolutely makes sense, because if you are one of those people who is maybe an extrovert thinker, and you are that walking encyclopedia, that walking dictionary who just understands and knows the rules, and you actually love the rules because it offers you some type of a structure, then whatever you're going to be keying off of, most likely, statistically speaking, is probably going to be your introverted sensing, which is just a repertoire of information that you keep, right? Where do I physically fit into my environment? How can I take the past and apply it to now, right? You're going to be walking through life and you're going to say, hey, I know this situation. I've experienced it before. How do I fit into this? I fit into it here, right? Observe, orient, decide, right? What do we decide? Well, where does it fit into the rules at, right? You're making that internal judgment and then hitting it with, okay, these rules, this external stimuli of the rules that have been placed upon me. I understand this. Boom, we can go ahead and decide and act accordingly, which is going to keep us in perfect homeostasis. One thing to understand is none of the 16 personality types like to be out of a homeostatic environment, right? Homeostasis, the quality of everything being even keel, right? Being as it should. Nobody truly likes to be out of that system of homeostasis, right? It may be fun to mix things up once in a while, but as long as it's by our own doing and as long as it is in a controlled environment. That's why we like roller coasters so much, right? We get on a roller coaster, cool, we can put a little thing on, we can get pushed around everywhere, but there's a certain level of control that we have because we have decided to step into the line. We decided to buckle ourselves in, and we've done the safety checks, and we trust the engineers have built this thing. So even though it's going to feel like a loss of control, we know ultimately it's going to be safe. Everything's going to be recoverable. But when we enter a position in life where we are all of a sudden out of homeostasis, we don't know if it's recoverable, we don't have control, it makes us really uncomfortable. So at the core of it, each of these different traits are just simply trying to find homeostasis. Okay? So whether you are extroverted or introverted, leading with those, you're trying to find homeostasis. You're trying to find where you fit in at, where you can find success, whatever you deem is successful, and where you can have the least amount of problems with the most amount of control physically possible. But when we are considering looping, especially when we are looking at what personality type we have to understand that if we are leading with something, the opposite is going to be true for that second trait. It's going to go an A, B, A, B. When we look at the breakdown of each of one of those traits. That's very crucial. That's very important because you may have a really good understanding, like 100% I am an extroverted thinker. I don't know if I augment with extroverted thinking. I don't know if I lead with extroverted thinking, but I have that somewhere in there. Cool. Well, then it very much narrows it down because we know that the next trait is going to have to be one of your processing traits, and it has to be extroverted. So what do I mean by this? Well, if we look, rewritten my board right here, if we know 100% that I have some type of introverted feeling, right? I know that, hey, maybe my memorization on the rules, maybe my understanding of stuff, extroverted thinking wise isn't absolutely the best, but hey, as far as introverted feeling goes, I feel like I have a really good basis for where my system of morality is, right? Maybe, right, a lot of your introverted feelers that you see, one of the stereotypes of them is that they're artists. Well, why are they artists? Because they know exactly where they fit in with this. They understand how they're feeling, where they morally fit into all this, and they're being that beacon and kicking it out. What is art other than being a beacon in society and pop culture and making light of where you fit into this moral framework, right? So maybe I know for a fact that I am an introverted feeler. Well, any of your personality types can be broken down into these 4 traits. Well, I know if I'm really leading with this, I know it's got to be pretty high. So it's either going to be in your primary or your augmenting functions. So 1 or 2, okay? If I see right here, I have 1 and 2 right here. That means this guy or this guy have to be extroverted. I know for a fact because that's the pattern we follow. Remember, we have the looping. So it has to either go from I to E or from E to I. Okay? So our only options here are EN or ES, right? Extroverted intuitiveness or extroverted sensing. Okay? We know that we can't have 2 judging functions right here, right? Because you can't observe and orient through a judging function. So we know it has to be augmented in one of these cases with a processing function, which is either going to be your intuitiveness or your sensing. And we know that it has to be extroversion. Okay? Well, that really narrows it down because if you know that you're leading with your introverted feeling, then you can look at yourself and say, okay, I generally know what extroverted sensing and extroverted intuitiveness are. Don't worry, we'll have a video on that. We'll fully explain each one of these. Now I can just kind of test bed it. You can literally go through life with this in mind. Okay, am I leading with introverted feeling? And you can test bed it. You can try to act in a way that leads with introverted feeling and see if you find yourself falling into that very naturally or not, right? Because Myers-briggs is just a system of prioritization. If you're going to fall naturally into that, then you're going to. That's just how your brain processes information. That's how it prioritizes information. And if not, if you're like, I'm really trying to lead with introverted feeling, and you feel yourself having to force your way through that door, well, maybe that's not necessarily correct, right? You may really be augmenting with introverted feeling, okay? In which case, you can test it again. Okay, am I really placing this priority on physical stuff outside my reach, directly outside my reach, or am I looking a lot more at patterns? Well, a really easy way that I have found is to look at what you do on a day-to-day basis. In my case, I really lead. This is my priority. I'm an extroverted intuitor. I can sit there all day long and live in my brain. Yes, I do need some type of external stimuli, but I am a people watcher. I can go to a coffee shop and spend my entire day sitting there watching people and looking at patterns and spend the entire day living rent-free in my own head and be completely fine and mentally stimulated with it. My extroverted sensors, those are really going to be our athletes. Why? Because they need to interact with their physical environment around them. If they are sitting there going through their head the entire day, they're going to go crazy. They're going to go stir crazy. They need to be getting their fingers dirty. They need to be getting into stuff. So you're like, okay, well, I know for a fact that I'm leading in some capacity with introverted feeling, but I don't know which one. Okay, are you an artist? Do you like painting? Maybe you like sculpting. And you find yourself having all these deep emotional feelings and you're like, I can't express them unless I am physically interacting with my environment through my sculpting process or through my painting or maybe through instruments or something of that nature. You may be leading with that. And then it's just trial and error from there. Right? And there's some guesswork in there, and there's some trial and error through there, and you may think that you're this way, and then you'll go through life a little bit and be like, I don't know why I thought like that, right? And there's a lot of different reasons why that may happen, and it's okay, because remember, this isn't an all or nothing thing. There's nothing 100% in psychology, really, or personality types for that matter. There's very little stuff that is 100%, That kind of leads me to another point, is beware of unhealthy traits. You're going to hear me repeat this quite a bit, right? Whether it's through traumas or bad upbringings or maybe you're just having a really bad day, we can sometimes trick ourselves into trying to act in a way that we probably shouldn't act. And this goes into the cycles of looping, okay? We're going to talk about looping in another video, but if you're going through the OODA loop process, you're bouncing between 1 and 2, 1 or 2, right? Well, if you get into a really unhealthy process where you're looping these bottom two over and over, regardless of what they are, that could be really unhealthy. And that could be an onset of stress. It could be poor lifestyle choices. It could be, again, trauma manifesting itself. It could just be a poor upbringing, or maybe you have just inadvertently neglected this part of yourself, right? Maybe you are an intuitor who's really leading with that feeling function, but you grew up in a family full of thinkers and athletes, right? Maybe you grew up in a family that was completely opposite of you. So you've actually accidentally neglected what you've prioritized, and you've kind of tricked yourself into prioritizing these things that you're naturally weak in, that your brain doesn't want to prioritize, right? Sometimes that can make you healthy, but oftentimes that can make you a little scattered, a little inefficient, okay? So beware of thinking like, hey, yeah, I'm really solid on my introverted feeling, but maybe you're having a bad day. You have to look at yourself holistically. You have to fully know yourself and come to terms with your good days and your bad days and what your biases in life are and what the different factors are that play into this. Because if you're unwilling to look at yourself, then you're going to get skewed results at the end of the day. So, quick recap on everything that we discussed today. I hope my first sentence at the very beginning makes a little bit more sense, right? Introversion and extroversion are nothing more than a way to label where we are getting our stimuli from. For introverts, you're getting that stimuli internally. Extroverts, we're getting it externally, okay? Each of these, as you can see, are going to interplay with each of the traits a little bit differently, okay? And there's a lot to understand. There's a lot of trial and error. But at the very core of it, understand extroversion, you're probably going to need to be interacting with your environment, whether mentally or physically, a lot more to really start growing in those ideas a little bit, okay? If you are more introverted in any of your traits, especially if you're leading with that introversion on those traits, you're probably going to be pulling it from inside, and you're going to be trying to be that lighthouse, that beacon that's pushing it out into the world. Remember, guys, this world needs all 16 personality types. Every single person has a role here. And the wonderful thing is all 16 personality types have their own type of superpower. If you can figure out where you fit in at, you're going to start thriving, and you're going to feel as though you have a supernatural advantage over everybody else. Why? Because that's how we were designed. We're designed to prioritize stuff. And when you start stepping into that, what you prioritize, you become efficient and confident, right? That confidence follows progress, and you will start making wonderful leaps in your progress as you start stepping into what you find, into what you prioritize, because it's going to be efficient. Okay, you're going to be working with yourself a lot better. You're going to be learning a lot better, and you're going to be able to interact with others a lot better. So thank you again for joining me. Please like, subscribe. I won't go through that whole spiel again. I hope to see you back Next week, we are going to be talking a little bit more in depth about our judging functions. Okay, that's our thinking and our feeling. I hope to see you there. Until then, everyone stay creative, be safe, God bless, and have a great day.